Subscribe to Storylab for more stories. Now, let's begin this one. Chapter 1. The Quiet Before. Dalton Larson had spent 23 years in military intelligence before retiring to what most people would call a quiet life. Most people didn't know that retirement meant consulting directly with the Secretary of Defense on matters that never made it to briefings or reports. They didn't know that the modest house in Alexandria, Virginia, contained a secure communication room that connected him to some of the most powerful people in the Pentagon. His wife, Melissa, knew. She'd been a Marine Corps logistics officer when they met, and she understood the weight of secrets. Their son, Mitch, knew his father had served, but like most 22-year-olds, he was more focused on building his own path. The kid had joined the Army against Dalton's initial wishes, not because Dalton didn't respect the service, but because he knew exactly what kind of hell could hide behind polished brass and patriotic rhetoric. On a Tuesday evening in October, Dalton was reviewing classified documents about contractor fraud in Afghanistan when his encrypted phone buzzed. Not the regular cell phone. The other one. "Larson," he answered. "Dad." Mitch's voice was wrong. Tight. Pain wrapped around every syllable. Dalton's entire body went rigid. "What happened?" I need you to listen. Don't react, just listen." A wet cough. "I'm okay. Mostly okay." "Mitch." "Colonel Gonzalez beat the hell out of me during training today. Said I showed him disrespect. Broke my ribs, Dad. Maybe my jaw. They took me to the base clinic, and the doctor, Colonel Johnson, he wrote it up as a training accident. Fall from an obstacle course." Dalton's hand tightened around the phone until his knuckles went white. His voice remained perfectly calm. "Where are you right now?" "My barracks. They told me to keep my mouth shut or it gets worse. Said I'm a troublemaker, that I can't handle military discipline." Another pause. "Dad, there were 40 guys watching. Not one of them will back me up. Gonzalez has them terrified. Tell me everything. Start from the beginning." Mitch's story came out in fragments. Morning PT had been brutal. Gonzalez had been on edge all week, screaming at everyone. Mitch had asked a question about proper hydration protocol during a ruck march. A simple, by-the-book question. Gonzalez had taken it as insubordination, told him to drop and give him 50. Standard stuff. But then, after the company dispersed, Gonzalez had ordered Mitch to stay behind. The colonel had circled him like a predator, asking if he thought he was smarter than his commanding officer. Before Mitch could answer, the first punch had landed in his solar plexus. Then his ribs. His face. When Mitch went down, Gonzalez kicked him twice more. He said, "This is what happens to smartasses who think they know better," Mitch whispered. Then he called over Captain Glenn and Lieutenant Johnson. They dragged me to the clinic. Doctor looked at me, looked at Gonzalez, and wrote up the accident report. No questions. Dalton's mind was already working through scenarios, protocols, chains of command. Who else saw it? My whole unit. 42 guys. But Terrell Duffy pulled me aside after. He said he wanted to report it, but Gonzalez threatened everyone. Said anyone who talked would find themselves in Afghanistan on the worst details imaginable, and that his reach went further than we could imagine. Terrell Duffy, Dalton repeated, filing the name away. He sounds like he has some integrity. He's solid, Dad. But he's scared. We all are. Mitch's voice cracked. What do I do? Dalton stood up, already walking to his secure room. You do nothing. You recover. You keep your head down for exactly 48 hours. Can you do that? Yeah, but. No buts, Mitch. I know you want to fight this yourself. I know you're thinking about going to the Inspector General or filing a formal complaint. Don't. That paper trail will get buried or twisted against you. Trust me on this. What are you going to do? Dalton unlocked the secure room, his fingers already pulling up files on his computer. I'm going to remind some people that there are still consequences in this world. I'll call you in 2 days. Stay safe. After hanging up, Dalton sat in silence for exactly 60 seconds. It was an old habit from his intelligence days. 60 seconds to let rage pass, to let emotion drain away, to let the calculating, ruthless part of his mind take control. Then he went to work. Chapter 2. Building the Arsenal. By Wednesday morning, Dalton had read Colonel Charles Gonzalez's entire military file. It wasn't the official file, that was sanitized garbage meant for promotion boards. This was the real file, the one that intelligence kept on everyone above a certain rank. The one that listed every allegation, every whisper complaint, every suspicious incident that never quite made it to official channels. Gonzalez was a cancer. 3 separate incidents at previous postings involving excessive force. 2 formal complaints that had been withdrawn after the complainants were suddenly reassigned to career-ending positions. A pattern of behavior that screamed abuse of power, protected by a network of officers who either feared him or benefited from his brutality. The file also showed Gonzalez's protectors, Captain Waylon Glenn, his executive officer and loyal enforcer. Lieutenant Colonel Orville Johnson, the base medical officer who'd been covering for Gonzalez for 6 years. Both had their own buried skeletons. Melissa appeared in the doorway with coffee. She'd learned long ago not to ask questions about the secure room. How bad? Bad enough. Dalton took the coffee, kissed her cheek. He put his hands on our son. Her expression didn't change, but her eyes went cold. Melissa Larson had commanded supply convoys through hostile territory in Iraq. She'd lost friends to IEDs and ambushes. She knew exactly what kind of evil could wear a uniform. "What do you need from me?" she asked. "Keep things normal here. If I'm not back in 3 days, call Douglas Flowers at the Pentagon." His direct line. She nodded. Douglas Flowers was the Deputy Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence. He and Dalton had worked together on operations that would be classified for the next 50 years. "You're going to the base tomorrow morning." "I'm going as concerned father. Just a civilian who wants answers about his son's training accident." Dalton's smile was cold. "I want to see how far they'll take the lie." Wednesday passed in a blur of encrypted calls and careful research. Dalton contacted 3 separate sources inside the Pentagon, people who owed him favors from his intelligence days. He didn't tell them what he was planning. He just asked them to be ready. He also reached out to Dominic O'Connor, a military investigator with the Inspector General's office who'd worked several cases with Dalton. O'Connor was one of the few genuinely honest people in military law enforcement. "I need you to tell me about Fort Carson's command climate," Dalton said when O'Connor called him back. "That's a specific question. You looking at someone?" "Colonel Charles Gonzalez, training commander." A long pause. "Jesus, Dalton, what's your interest?" "Personal. Very personal." "Then you should know that Gonzalez is untouchable. 3-star general named Berman thinks he walks on water. We've tried to investigate him twice. Both times the general made it disappear. You're walking into a brick wall. Thanks for the warning." Dalton hung up and added General Berman to his list. The rot went higher than he'd thought. That evening, Dalton called Mitch again. His son sounded better, probably painkillers helping with the ribs. "How are you holding up?" "Angry. But I'm keeping quiet like you said." A pause. "Dad, I heard Gonzalez bragging today. Said he broke another weak recruit, that the Army needs to weed out the soft ones. He doesn't even think he did anything wrong. Men like him never do. That's going to be his weakness." Dalton kept his voice gentle. "I'm coming to the base tomorrow. I'll be there as just your father. No rank, no titles. I want you to hear how they handle a civilian complaint. They'll shut you down hard. I'm counting on it. Mitch, I need you to do something for me. That soldier, Terrell Duffy, is he someone you trust completely? With my life?" "Good. I need you to tell him to document everything he saw. Written statement, dated, signed. He keeps it hidden. Doesn't file it anywhere. Doesn't tell anyone else. Just writes it down exactly as he remembers it. Can he do that?" "I'll ask him tonight. And Mitch, no matter what happens tomorrow, no matter what you hear, trust that I know what I'm doing." Thursday morning, Dalton dressed in civilian clothes, jeans, a button-down shirt, work boots. He looked like any blue-collar father coming to sort out a problem with his kid's training. He drove his personal truck, not the government-issued sedan that sat in his garage. Everything about his appearance said ordinary, powerless, forgettable. The drive to Fort Carson took 4 hours. Dalton spent them listening to music and mentally preparing. He'd learned long ago that the key to intelligence work wasn't just gathering information. It was understanding human nature. Pride, arrogance, the certainty that power made you invulnerable. These were the weaknesses he'd exploit. Chapter 3. walking into the lion's den. The guard at Fort Carson's main gate checked Dalton's ID and waved him through with minimal interest. Just another visitor. Dalton followed the signs to the base headquarters, parked in a civilian lot, and walked inside like he'd done it 1,000 times before. The corporal at the reception desk looked up with practiced boredom. "Help you, sir. I'm here to see Colonel Charles Gonzalez. My son is in his training unit. Do you have an appointment?" "No, but I think the colonel will want to see me. My son had a training accident earlier this week, and I have some questions about how it was handled." The corporal's expression shifted slightly. "Sir, if you have concerns about your son's training, you should submit a formal inquiry through. I prefer to speak with Colonel Gonzalez directly." "Dalton Larson. My son is Private Mitchell Larson." The name didn't register with the corporal, which was perfect. The kid picked up the phone, spoke quietly for a moment, then hung up. "Colonel Gonzalez says he can give you 10 minutes. Building C, second floor." Dalton thanked him and headed across the quad. The morning sun was bright, soldiers moving in organized formations, the everyday machinery of military life grinding forward. Beautiful and terrible, order built on discipline and trust. When that trust was betrayed, the whole structure became a cage. Colonel Gonzalez's office was exactly what Dalton expected. Awards and commendations on the walls. A large desk positioned to put visitors in a psychologically inferior position. Photos of the colonel with various dignitaries. A shrine to ego. Gonzalez himself was a compact man in his late 40s, fit, but with the beginning of a gut that suggested too much desk time. His handshake was unnecessarily firm, his smile manufactured. "Mr. Larson, I understand you have concerns about your son." "I do." Dalton sat without being invited, a subtle power play. "Mitch called me Tuesday night. Said he'd been beaten by you during training, and that the incident was covered up as an accident." Gonzalez's smile never wavered. "Your son is confused, Mr. Larson. Private Larson had an unfortunate fall during obstacle course training. He was treated by our medical staff and cleared to return to duty. If he told you something different, I'm afraid he's either misremembering due to his injuries, or he's fabricating a story to avoid responsibility for his own clumsiness." He described the beating in detail. Said you punched him repeatedly after the morning formation, then had your officers file a false report. "Mr. Larson, I understand you're concerned about your son, but I have to tell you that Private Larson has shown some disciplinary issues since arriving here. Nothing major, but a pattern of questioning authority, thinking he knows better than his instructors." Gonzalez leaned back in his chair. Sometimes young men who struggle with military discipline create elaborate stories to justify their failures. Dalton let the insult hang in the air for a moment. "You're saying my son is a liar." "I'm saying he's struggling with the transition to military life. It happens. Some recruits simply aren't cut out for the Army." "Were there witnesses to this training accident?" "The entire company was present during morning PT. I have 42 soldiers who can confirm that Private Larson fell during the obstacle course. Not one of them saw anything resembling what your son described." There it was. The lie, delivered with absolute confidence. Dalton showed no reaction. "I'd like to speak with some of those witnesses." "That's not possible. My soldiers have training schedules to maintain. I'm not going to disrupt unit cohesion because one recruit can't handle the reality of military service." Gonzalez's tone sharpened. "Mr. Larson, I've been patient with you out of respect for your concern as a father, but I think we're done here. I'd also like to see the medical report. That's confidential military information. You have no right to access it." Dalton stood slowly, his expression calm. "Colonel Gonzalez, I'm going to give you 15 minutes to tell me the truth about what happened to my son. 15 minutes to admit what you did, to file a proper incident report, and to face the consequences of your actions." Gonzalez stood as well, his face flushing red. "Excuse me. You beat my son. You had your officers cover it up. You've created an environment of fear where 42 soldiers are too terrified to tell the truth. I'm giving you 15 minutes to fix it. Are you threatening me?" Gonzalez's voice rose. "Let me make something very clear, Mr. Larson. I am a colonel in the United States Army. You're a civilian with no authority on this base. Your son is a liar and a troublemaker. And if you continue to make these baseless accusations, I will have you arrested for harassment and removed from this installation." Dalton checked his watch. 14 minutes. Gonzalez hit a button on his phone. "Security, this is Colonel Gonzalez. I need an escort to remove a civilian from my office. Immediately." Within 90 seconds, 2 military police officers appeared. Dalton recognized the sergeant, Bud Robertson, according to his name tape. A career MP, probably seen 100 difficult situations. "This man is making threatening statements," Gonzalez said. "I want him escorted off the base and barred from reentry." Robertson looked uncomfortable but professional. "Sir, if you'll come with us, please." Dalton didn't move. 13 minutes, Colonel. "Remove him. Now." Robertson stepped forward. "Sir, I don't want to make this difficult." "It won't be difficult," Dalton said quietly. He turned to face Gonzalez directly. "I'm going to wait outside this building. 12 minutes from now, the truth about what you've done is going to come crashing down on you. You have that long to get ahead of it. Get him out of here." Robertson and his partner guided Dalton out of the office, down the stairs, and toward the parking lot. They weren't rough, just firm. Robertson said quietly, "Sir, I don't know what this is about, but you need to let it go. Colonel Gonzalez doesn't tolerate challenges to his authority." "I know exactly what kind of man Colonel Gonzalez is," Dalton replied. "That's why I'm here." They left him at his truck with a warning not to return to the building. Dalton leaned against the hood, checking his watch. 9 minutes. Chapter 4. The Countdown. Inside the headquarters building, Colonel Gonzalez paced his office, still furious. Captain Waylon Glenn stood near the door, having arrived moments after the civilian was removed. "Who the hell was that?" Glenn asked. "Some nobody. Private Larson's father." Gonzalez dropped into his chair. "Came in here making insane accusations. Said I beat his son, that we covered it up." Glenn's expression tightened. "What did you tell him?" "The truth. That his son fell during training, that we have 42 witnesses, and that if he continues harassing us, he'll face legal consequences." Gonzalez waved dismissively. Another desperate parent who can't accept that their precious child isn't special. He seemed pretty confident for someone making baseless accusations. They always are. These people watch too many movies, think they can come onto a military base and demand answers like they're entitled to them. Gonzalez pulled up his email. "I'm going to file a report with the Provost Marshal's office. Create a record of his harassment in case he tries to escalate." Outside, Dalton watched the second hand sweep around his watch face. 7 minutes. He'd spent his entire intelligence career understanding timing, knowing when to push, when to wait, when to let someone hang themselves with their own arrogance. Gonzalez was following the script perfectly, dismissing a civilian complaint, hiding behind military authority, confident that his position made him untouchable. 5 minutes. A text message appeared on Dalton's phone. "From Douglas Flowers, ready on your signal." Dalton replied. 3 minutes. Inside the Pentagon, Flowers sat in his office reviewing the package Dalton had sent him the previous day. Everything documented, everything verified. Gonzalez's history, Johnson's complicity, the pattern of abuse that had been buried under official silence. And most importantly, the evidence that this wasn't an isolated incident, but part of a systemic failure in command accountability. Flowers had been waiting for someone like Dalton to bring him something like this. The Department of Defense had been hemorrhaging credibility over abuse scandals, and the Secretary had made it clear that the next verifiable case would result in immediate public consequences. No more quiet reassignments. No more protecting bad officers. 3 minutes. Gonzalez was typing an email to General Berman, complaining about the civilian intrusion, when his desk phone rang. Internal line. Unfamiliar extension. Colonel Gonzalez. "Colonel, this is Sergeant Robertson, MP duty desk. The civilian we removed from your office. Do you want us to file formal trespassing charges?" "No, just keep him off the base. If he returns, then we'll pursue charges." Gonzalez hung up, satisfied. The situation was contained. 2 minutes. Dalton's phone buzzed. A text from Mitch. Terrell wrote everything down. Says he's ready to testify if you need him. Another text, this one from Melissa. "Whatever you're doing, I trust you. Come home safe." 1 minute. Dalton walked away from his truck, moving to a bench with a clear view of the headquarters building. The autumn air was crisp, leaves turning gold and red. A beautiful day. The kind of day that made you believe the world was fundamentally good, that justice existed, that monsters couldn't hide forever. 30 seconds. Inside Gonzalez's office, the colonel was reviewing duty rosters when his desk phone rang again. Different tone, this was an outside line. The caller ID showed a Pentagon prefix. He answered with practiced professionalism. Colonel Gonzalez. Colonel, this is Deputy Undersecretary Flowers calling from the office of the Secretary of Defense. We need to discuss Private Mitchell Larson's training incident from Tuesday. Gonzalez froze. The Pentagon didn't call about individual training accidents. Ever. Sir, I'm not sure I understand. Private Larson had a fall during obstacle course training. It's been documented and... Stop talking, Colonel. Flowers' voice was ice. 12 minutes ago, a man named Dalton Larson visited your office. He gave you 15 minutes to tell the truth about what happened to his son. You chose to call security instead. Do you know who Dalton Larson is? Gonzalez's mouth went dry. A civilian. The private's father. Dalton Larson is a senior advisor to this office with top secret/SCI clearance and direct access to the Secretary of Defense. He spent 23 years in military intelligence, with operational authority that exceeded yours by several orders of magnitude. When he retired, we kept him on retainer because his expertise is invaluable to national security. The room seemed to tilt. Gonzalez gripped his desk. More importantly, Flowers continued, he's a father whose son was beaten by a commanding officer and then had that assault covered up by corrupt medical personnel. You have exactly 60 seconds to tell me why I shouldn't have you arrested immediately. Chapter 5. The walls close in. Gonzalez's mind raced through possibilities, excuses, escape routes. His instinct was to deny everything, to rely on the same protection that had shielded him for years. Sir, I don't know what Mr. Larson told you, but Private Larson had an accident during... I'm going to stop you there, Flowers interrupted. Before you commit yourself to that lie, I want you to know what we have. We have Private Larson's medical records showing injuries inconsistent with a fall, specifically knuckle pattern bruising and defensive wounds. We have a sworn statement from a witness who saw you beat Private Larson. We have your service record showing 3 previous allegations of excessive force. We have Lieutenant Colonel Johnson's falsified medical report. And we have a pattern of command climate issues at Fort Carson that suggests systematic abuse being covered up at multiple levels. Gonzalez felt his chest constrict. Sir, I'm not finished. In approximately 90 seconds, I'm going to conference in the base commander, the Inspector General, and JAG. They're going to place you under immediate investigation. Your command authority will be suspended. Every soldier in your unit will be interviewed separately. Every report you filed in the last year will be audited. Do you understand what's happening? Yes, sir. Gonzalez's voice was barely a whisper. Then I'm going to ask you one question, and your answer will determine whether you spend the rest of your life in prison or merely lose your career and pension. Did you physically assault Private Mitchell Larson on Tuesday morning? The silence stretched for 5 eternal seconds. Yes, sir. I did. Outside, Dalton saw the exact moment it happened. Through the second-floor window, he could see Gonzalez slump in his chair, head in hands. The colonel's entire world was collapsing, and it had taken exactly 12 minutes from the time he'd called security. Dalton's phone buzzed. Flowers, he confessed. Moving to Phase 2. Phase 2 was where things got interesting. Inside the office, Gonzalez was still on the phone when Captain Glenn burst through the door. Colonel, I just had a call from the Provost Marshal. They're sending investigators. Gonzalez held up a hand to silence him, still listening to Flowers. You will remain in your office, Flowers was saying. You will not contact Lieutenant Colonel Johnson, Captain Glenn, or any other officer involved in this cover-up. You will not access any files or computers. You will not leave the base. Investigators will arrive within 2 hours to take your formal statement. Is this clear? Yes, sir. Put me on speaker. Gonzalez pressed the button. Glenn's face had gone pale. This is Deputy Undersecretary Flowers speaking to everyone in that office. As of this moment, Colonel Gonzalez has been relieved of command authority pending investigation. Captain Glenn, you are ordered to report to the base legal office immediately. Do not discuss this case with anyone. Do not attempt to contact witnesses or alter any documents. Failure to comply will result in criminal charges. Acknowledge. Glenn's voice shook. Understood, sir. You have destroyed the trust that is fundamental to military service. You have betrayed the soldiers under your command. And you have learned the hardest lesson there is, that rank does not make you invulnerable, and that eventually someone more powerful will hold you accountable. Flowers paused. Mr. Larson is still on that base. If anything happens to him or his son, if they experience even the slightest retaliation, I will personally ensure that every officer involved spends the maximum time in Leavenworth. Get out of my army. The line went dead. Gonzalez sat in his chair, stunned. Everything he'd built, 24 years of service, his reputation, his authority, gone in 12 minutes because he'd underestimated a civilian in jeans and work boots. Glenn stood frozen. What do we do? Nothing. There's nothing we can do. Gonzalez looked up, and for the first time in years, he looked genuinely afraid. He knew. Larson knew exactly what would happen. He gave me 15 minutes to confess because he'd already put everything in motion. The phone call, the investigation, all of it. He set a timer and watched me walk into it. Who is he? Someone we should never have fucked with. Chapter 6. The Reckoning Spreads. Within the hour, the base was in controlled chaos. Military investigators from the Inspector General's office arrived with sealed orders. The base commander, a 2-star general, made an emergency call to the Pentagon and emerged from his office looking shaken. Every soldier in Gonzalez's training company was separated and interviewed individually. Dalton remained on the base, now with official authorization. The provost marshal himself apologized for the earlier removal, explaining that he hadn't been briefed on the situation. Dalton accepted the apology with grace, but his focus was elsewhere. He went to find his son. Mitch was in the barracks when Dalton arrived. The kid stood quickly, wincing from his ribs, and Dalton saw the full extent of the damage for the first time. Yellow-purple bruising across Mitch's jaw, the way he held his left side, the split lip that was still healing. Dad, Mitch said quietly, I heard what happened. The whole base is talking about it. Dalton pulled his son into a careful hug, mindful of the injuries. How are you holding up? Better now. Scared before, but better now. Mitch pulled back. What you did? I don't even know what to say. You don't have to say anything. No one hurts my son and gets away with it. Dalton guided Mitch to sit on his bunk. The investigators are going to want to interview you. Tell them everything, exactly as it happened. Don't minimize it. Don't exaggerate it. Just the truth. What's going to happen to Gonzalez? Court-martial at minimum. Probably prison time. His career is over. Dalton's expression hardened. But he's not the only one. Johnson falsified medical records. Glenn helped cover it up. And there's a 3-star general named Berman who's been protecting Gonzalez for years. They're all going down. Mitch shook his head in disbelief. I thought I'd have to just take it. Live with it. Maybe get reassigned and try to forget. Never. You should never have to live with injustice, especially not from people who are supposed to lead you. Dalton squeezed his son's shoulder. The Army is built on values. Honor, integrity, duty. When officers violate those values, they destroy everything the uniform represents. What happened to you wasn't just assault. It was a betrayal of everything military service is supposed to mean. There was a knock on the door. Dominic O'Connor stood there in his investigator's uniform, looking apologetic. Mr. Larson, Private Larson, I'm here to conduct the formal interview. Dalton stood. Dominic, glad it's you handling this. I wish we'd caught it earlier, O'Connor said grimly. But we're catching it now. Private Larson, if you're ready, I need you to walk me through everything that happened Tuesday morning. As Mitch gave his statement, Dalton stepped outside to take a call. It was Terrell Duffy, Mitch's friend. Mr. Larson? They just interviewed me. I told them everything I saw. Duffy's voice was steady but emotional. I should have spoken up sooner. I should have. You're speaking up now. That's what matters. Dalton kept his tone gentle. You were in an impossible situation. Gonzalez had created an environment where speaking the truth meant destroying your career. That's not on you. Still feels like I failed, Mitch. You didn't. You're standing up now when it counts. That takes courage. After the call, Dalton walked back toward the headquarters building. He saw Gonzalez being escorted out by 2 MPs, his service pistol already confiscated, his bearing no longer that of a confident commander, but of a man who knew his life was over. Their eyes met for a moment. Gonzalez looked away first. Chapter 7. The Dominoes Fall. The investigation moved with brutal efficiency. Within 48 hours, the full scope of Gonzalez's pattern of abuse became clear. He'd been systematically terrorizing soldiers for 6 years, using fear and the cover of tough training to mask what amounted to criminal assault. 17 soldiers came forward with their own stories, incidents that had been buried or explained away. Lieutenant Colonel Orville Johnson cracked under questioning. The base medical officer admitted to falsifying at least a dozen reports covering up Gonzalez's violence. He'd done it because Gonzalez had dirt on him. Johnson had been having an affair with a subordinate officer, and Gonzalez had threatened to expose it unless Johnson cooperated. The confession was damning, pathetic, and sealed Johnson's fate. Captain Waylon Glenn tried to lawyer up, but his involvement was too clear. He'd witnessed multiple assaults and not only failed to report them, but actively intimidated soldiers who wanted to come forward. His military career ended with a dishonorable discharge recommendation. But the real prize was General Berman. The 3-star had been Gonzalez's protector, the power behind the throne who'd made previous investigations disappear. Dalton's contacts in Pentagon intelligence pulled Berman's communications, and what they found was worse than anyone expected. Berman hadn't just protected Gonzalez. He'd actively cultivated a network of abusive officers across multiple bases, believing that hard men made better soldiers. His philosophy was that modern army had gone soft, that political correctness had weakened military effectiveness, and that officers like Gonzalez were necessary to maintain proper discipline. It was a cancer that had metastasized throughout an entire command structure. Douglas Flowers personally delivered Berman's termination notice. The general was given a choice: retire immediately with reduced rank and a letter of reprimand in his file, or face court-martial for dereliction of duty and conduct unbecoming an officer. He chose retirement, but the damage to his legacy was permanent. Dalton watched these dominoes fall with cold satisfaction. This wasn't just about his son anymore. It was about cutting out rot that had been poisoning the Army for years. On Friday afternoon, he sat with Mitch in the base coffee shop. His son looked better, the swelling in his jaw going down, moving with less pain. "Dad, they're offering me a transfer to a different unit. Said I could leave Fort Carson, start fresh somewhere else." Mitch wrapped his hand around his coffee cup. "What do you think I should do?" "What do you want to do?" "I want to stay. I want to finish my training here with my unit. I don't want Gonzalez to have driven me out." Dalton smiled. "Then stay. Show them what kind of soldier you really are." "But what about the other guys? The ones who didn't speak up? They're saying I'm a snitch, that I broke the code. Some of them will think that. Some of them will respect you for having the courage they didn't. And some of them will realize that there's no honor in protecting monsters." Dalton leaned forward. "Mitch, you're going to have a choice every day of your military career. You could be the kind of soldier who looks the other way when bad things happen, or you could be the kind who stands up for what's right even when it's hard. That choice defines who you are. You made it look easy. It wasn't easy. It was necessary. There's a difference." Dalton's expression softened. "I had resources most people don't have. I had connections, experience, authority. Most soldiers in your position wouldn't be able to do what I did. That's why the system has to work, so that people without power can still get justice." Did the system work? This time, yes, because I forced it to, but that's the problem. It shouldn't require someone like me to make the system function. It should work on its own. Dalton sighed. "That's what we're trying to fix now. New policies, better oversight, protections for whistleblowers. It won't be perfect, but it'll be better than what you went through." Chapter 8. The Trial. 6 months later, Dalton sat in the courtroom at Fort Leavenworth for Gonzalez's court-martial. The proceeding was open to the public, a deliberate choice by the Judge Advocate General's office to demonstrate transparency. Gonzalez sat at the defense table, looking smaller than Dalton remembered. Prison time awaiting trial had aged him, stripped away the arrogant bearing. He was facing 12 charges: assault, battery, conduct unbecoming an officer, dereliction of duty, falsifying official documents, and witness intimidation. The prosecution was methodical and devastating. They presented Mitch's testimony, Terrell Duffy's eyewitness account, medical evidence, and statement from 16 other soldiers Gonzalez had abused. They showed the pattern of behavior, the cover-ups, the systematic betrayal of trust. Gonzalez's defense attorney tried to argue that his client had been enforcing legitimate military discipline, that soldiers today were too soft, that a certain level of physical confrontation was normal in training environments. The argument fell flat. This wasn't discipline. It was sadism with a uniform. Dalton testified as well, not about the incident itself, but about his investigation and what he'd found. He kept his testimony factual, clinical, devastating. He detailed how he'd built the case, contacted the Pentagon, and given Gonzalez the chance to come clean. He described the colonel's arrogance, his certainty that rank made him untouchable. "Did you intend for this case to go public?" the prosecutor asked. "Absolutely," Dalton replied. "Not for revenge, but for accountability. If we'd handled this quietly, with a simple reassignment and a sealed file, the message would have been that officers who abuse their power can still walk away. I wanted every soldier in the Army to know that there are consequences, that the system can work, that speaking up matters." The verdict came after 3 days of deliberation. Guilty on all counts. Sentencing was harsh. Gonzalez received 8 years in military prison, dishonorable discharge, loss of all rank and benefits. He'd entered the Army as an idealistic lieutenant and left it as a convicted felon in his 50s, with no pension, no prospects, and a criminal record that would follow him forever. Johnson got 4 years and a dishonorable discharge. Glenn got 2 years and was stripped of his commission. General Berman wasn't prosecuted criminally, but his retirement was at reduced rank, his legacy destroyed. He'd been mentioned by name in the Secretary of Defense's public statement about the case, identified as a failed leader who'd enabled abuse through neglect and misguided loyalty. After the sentencing, Dalton met Mitch outside the courthouse. His son was in dress uniform now, a specialist's rank on his shoulders. He'd finished his training, excelled in his follow-on schooling, and was about to deploy with a Ranger unit. "It's really over," Mitch said. "This part is. But the work continues." Dalton looked at his son with pride. "You're going to see a lot in your career. Good leaders and bad ones, systems that work and systems that fail. Remember this. Remember that one person standing up can change everything." "I will. And Dad," Mitch's voice was thick with emotion, "thank you for believing me, for fighting for me. Always, son. Always." Chapter 9. Aftermath and Legacy. 1 year after Gonzalez's conviction, Dalton sat in a Pentagon briefing room with Douglas Flowers and a team of military reform advocates. They were presenting a new training initiative based on the Larson case: mandatory reporting systems, independent investigations for all abuse allegations, protections against retaliation, and a complete overhaul of how command climate was assessed. The Larson case became a turning point, Flowers told the assembled officers. Not because of the abuse itself. Tragically, we've had too many of those. But because it demonstrated that transparency and accountability could work, that we could excise rot without destroying the institution. Dalton listened, but didn't speak. This wasn't his show anymore. He'd done what he needed to do. Protected his son, exposed corruption, forced the system to work. Now it was up to others to make sure the changes stuck. After the briefing, he drove home to Alexandria. Melissa was in the kitchen making dinner, the smell of garlic and herbs filling the house. She kissed him when he walked in. "How was it?" "Productive. They're actually listening." Dalton loosened his tie. "Maybe something good comes out of all this." "It already has." Mitch called earlier. His unit commander praised him in front of the whole company. Said he was the kind of soldier the Army needed, someone with both courage and integrity. Dalton smiled. That was worth more than any medal or commendation. That evening, he sat in his study going through emails when one caught his attention. It was from Terrell Duffy, now a sergeant and working as a military instructor himself. "Mr. Larson, I wanted you to know that I tell your son's story to every class I teach. Not the whole thing, but the important parts. That speaking up matters. That one person can make a difference. That rank doesn't make someone right. Some of the instructors don't like it. They think I'm undermining the chain of command. But the students get it. They understand that real leadership means protecting the people who serve under you, not abusing them. Thank you for showing us what that looks like." Terrell. Dalton read the email twice, then forwarded it to Mitch with a simple message. "You started something important. Proud of you." 3 years later, Dalton was invited to speak at West Point's Ethics Symposium. He stood in front of 300 future officers and told them the story of what happened when his son was beaten by a colonel who thought he was untouchable. "Leadership isn't about rank or authority," Dalton told them. "It's about character. It's about doing the right thing even when it's hard, even when it costs you something, even when everyone around you is choosing the easy path of looking the other way." He paused, looking at the young faces staring back at him. "Some of you will face situations like the one my son faced. You'll see abuse, corruption, or incompetence, and you'll have to decide whether to speak up or stay silent. I can't tell you what to do in those moments, but I can tell you this. The measure of a leader isn't how they act when everyone is watching. It's how they act when no one is watching, when the only thing holding them accountable is their own conscience." After the speech, a young cadet approached him. "Sir, what you did for your son, using your connections, your power, that's not something most people can do. What about soldiers who don't have a father in the Pentagon?" It was a good question, an honest question. "You're right," Dalton acknowledged. "Most people don't have the resources I had. That's exactly why we changed the system. Now, there are independent investigators, protected reporting channels, and policies against retaliation. It's not perfect, but it's better than it was. But what if the system fails them? Then they do what my son did. They document everything. They find one person they can trust, and they refuse to be silenced. Sometimes speaking up destroys your career. Sometimes it gets you ostracized or punished. But the alternative, staying silent while people in power abuse that power, that destroys your soul." The cadet nodded slowly. "Thank you, sir." As Dalton drove back to Washington, he thought about that question. The system was better now, but it wasn't perfect. There would be other Gonzalez out there, other corrupt officers, other soldiers who needed someone to fight for them. But there would also be more people like Mitch, like Terrell, like the thousands of soldiers who'd learned from this case that accountability mattered. That evening, Dalton had dinner with Mitch, who was on leave between deployments. His son had been promoted to staff sergeant, had earned a combat infantry badge, and was being recommended for officer candidate school. "I got the OCS acceptance," Mitch said over dinner. "I'll be commissioning as a second lieutenant next year." "How do you feel about that?" "Excited. Nervous. Determined to be the kind of officer I wish I'd had from the beginning." Mitch paused. "I've been thinking a lot about leadership, about what it means to be responsible for other people's lives and careers. And what have you concluded? That the only thing that matters is whether the people under your command can trust you. Not fear you. Trust you. Trust that you'll make good decisions, that you'll listen when they have concerns, that you'll protect them from injustice even if it costs you something." Mitch met his father's eyes. "You taught me that. Not with words, but by showing me what it looked like." Dalton felt a lump in his throat. "You're going to be a great officer, Mitch. Better than I ever was." "I doubt that, but I'm going to try." They talked late into the night, father and son, about service and sacrifice and the thin line between discipline and abuse, about the burden of leadership and the responsibility of power, about how hard it was to do the right thing in a world that often rewarded doing the wrong thing. Later, after Mitch had left, Dalton sat in his study and pulled up the final investigation report on the Gonzalez case. 17 soldiers who'd been abused had come forward. 12 had left the Army entirely, traumatized by what they'd endured. 5 had stayed and were thriving under new leadership. But the real impact was harder to measure. How many other abusive officers have been stopped because of increased oversight? How many soldiers felt safer reporting misconduct because they'd seen the system actually work? How many leaders had changed their behavior because they knew they could no longer hide behind rank? There was no way to know for sure, but Dalton chose to believe it had mattered. Years later, when Dalton was fully retired and Mitch was a decorated captain leading his own company, they visited Fort Carson together. The base had been transformed. New leadership, new training protocols, a completely different culture. They stopped by the memorial that had been erected for soldiers who died in training accidents. A simple stone wall with names and dates. Honest accounting of loss, no cover-ups, no falsified reports. This is what accountability looks like, Mitch said quietly. Truth, even when it's painful. Dalton put his arm around his son's shoulders. You know what the best part of this whole thing is? It's not that Gonzalez went to prison. It's not even that the system changed. It's that you came through it stronger. You didn't let what happened make you bitter or cynical. You used it to become the kind of leader who would never do to someone else what was done to you. I had a good example, Mitch replied. They stood there together as the sun set over the base, father and son, both understanding that the fight for justice was never really over. There would always be people who abused power, who covered up crimes, who thought rank made them invulnerable. But there would also always be people who stood up to them, people who refused to be silenced, people who believed that doing the right thing mattered, even when it was hard. And sometimes, just sometimes, those people won. Epilogue. Colonel Charles Gonzalez was released from military prison after serving 6 years of his 8-year sentence. He moved to a small town in Montana, worked as a night shift security guard, and died alone in his apartment at age 67. His obituary made no mention of his military service. Lieutenant Colonel Orville Johnson lost his medical license and spent his prison sentence working in the facility library. After release, he worked as a medical billing clerk. He never practiced medicine again. Captain Waylon Glenn was dishonorably discharged and struggled to find work. He eventually started a small business that failed within 2 years. He declared bankruptcy at age 45. General Behrman's name was quietly removed from a building at the Command and General Staff College. He gave no interviews, wrote no memoirs, and lived in obscurity until his death at 72. Staff Sergeant Terrell Duffy commissioned as an officer and eventually rose to the rank of major. He became an advocate for military ethics and spoke openly about the importance of protecting soldiers from abusive leadership. Captain Mitchell Larson served with distinction for 15 years before transitioning to the private sector. He remained close with his father and often spoke publicly about the importance of accountability in leadership. Dalton Larson continued consulting for the Department of Defense until his final retirement at age 65. He and Melissa traveled extensively, spent time with grandchildren, and lived quietly in Alexandria. He gave occasional speeches on ethics and leadership, but mostly preferred to let his actions speak for themselves. The reforms implemented after the Larson case became standard protocol across all military branches. While abuse still occurred, the rate of successful prosecutions increased by 340%, and anonymous reporting led to earlier interventions before patterns of abuse could become entrenched. Not everyone was saved. Not every injustice was corrected. But the system was better than it had been, and that had to be enough. Because in the end, justice isn't about perfect outcomes. It's about people choosing to do the right thing, even when it's hard, even when they could get away with doing nothing, even when the easier path is to look the other way. Dalton Larson looked at his son, beaten and bloodied, and chose to fight. That choice changed everything.
This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your precious time. If you enjoyed this story, then please make sure you subscribe to this channel. That would help me a lot. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.